Welcome to the Girlfriend God Podcast, a podcast in search of and in service to the divine feminine, bringing you an equal mix of academic research and emotional spiritual experience. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment. If you enjoy this podcast, share it with your friends, rate and review it if you're listening on a streaming platform. Follow on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Now, let's get in the flow. I haven't seen the need to buy a fancy microphone, so.
Right. That's great. Okay.
So, today, I'm super excited to welcome D'vorah Grenn to the show. Kohenet Ruach, did I pronounce those things correctly?
Kohenet Ruach, yes.
Okay, D'vorah Grenn, Ph.D. She's an educator, writer, and this is the difficult one, mashpi'ah.
Ruchanit.
Which means spiritual guide, right?
Technically, okay. I think spiritual director, but I never use that term.
Okay. She founded the Lilith Institute, a center for feminist spirituality, in 1997. She co-directed the Women's Spirituality MA program at ITP Sofia University. She's taught Humanities and Philosophy classes at Napa Valley College. Her writings include Lilith's Fire, Reclaiming Our Sacred Lifeforce, Talking to Goddess, Prayer, Blessing Anthology with sacred writings from 72 women in 25 spiritual traditions, the Kohanot, Keepers of the Flame, in Stepping into Ourselves, an Anthology of Writing on Priestesses, Jewish Priestess and Lilith entries in the Encyclopedia of Women in the World Religions, and Spiritual Brokenness and the Healing Presence of the Sacred Feminine in FEMSPEC, which is an interdisciplinary feminist journal. She co-hosted 50 episodes of Priestessing the Priestesses and Tending Lilith's Fire broadcasts with Kohenet Annie Matan. Mm-hmm. And two of her favorite subjects to teach are Jewish magic and folklore and anything on the sacred feminine and different traditions. D'vorah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
That's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's sometimes embarrassing, to hear when when I see it in writing, it's not so much. But thank you, and thank you for having me on today.
And for someone like me, who's an avid, who walks the goddess path and who is a goddess worshiper and kind of devotee, that's a very impressive resume.
Thank you. Well, I can certainly tell you that before I went to grad school, so we're talking around like before 95, I did not have that consciousness at all.
Right.
Just fleeing corporate America and resettling.
Fleeing corporate America. Yeah. And I've had a few people on the show that kind of went through that transformation. Liz Kelly, who wrote the book Home to Her, walked away from kind of a corporate life and owning her own business to focus on this path and this life. So
a real transformation, always, I think.
Yes. So I think first I want to ask you to, since this is what you and I talked about previously, I want you to kind of explain to the listeners about what a Kohenet is, and kind of, if you could explain a little bit about that tradition and what you've written about and what you actually do, because I'm sure a lot of people don't know what that even is.
Right. Thank you. So a Kohenet simply means priestess in Hebrew, from the male version, which is Kohen, and taken from Aaron, Moses' brother, in the temple, to 3,000 years ago. I mean, we never really know. I mean, we would say at least 3,000, but tracking all these dates, I always say is an impossible but desired task.
Right.
Um, and when I came out here and started, first had my own small PR business and then discovered women's spirituality and all different forms of the goddess beyond the Roman and Greek ones we maybe learned about in school, Aphrodite and Venus and others that had been co-opted from earlier female deities. Um, it was, first of all, a very interesting search, looking at many different paths and routes to the same, probably same end place. And around 96, 97, I was doing certain things in ritual space. And I
Hmm.
had a couple of friends who were doing the same thing. So that included maybe, performing a wedding or giving marriage or wedding blessings. It later turned to also include funerary rites. And I stumble over that because it started with my dad and my stepmom.
Hmm.
Those were the people that really started me doing that at all. And that was obviously it's catching in my throat because it's
Right.
difficult. It was beautiful, both. Um, but before that, the wedding blessings, baby blessings, before the baby, when baby's in the womb and after the birth, these are the kinds of things we were doing. And we were all also social activists. So we we realized that many years ago, thousands of years ago, whether or not it was acknowledged in the Bible, the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, what's called also the Old Testament, or the Talmud, which interprets the Torah, whether it was written anywhere or not, women were priestessing. I mean,
Right.
it was inevitable, right? I mean, how could it not be? How could it be otherwise?
Right.
Especially because I'm sure, in ancient times, we were in multiple roles of healer, of often called witch or sorceress, but
Right.
prophetess, right? And we do have evidence of that in the sacred text. And so why would we not consider ourselves a priestess in modern times?
Right.
Because we realized that's what we were doing. We were building altars. We were doing, various functions. And certainly, one of my good friends was writing liturgy and adapting it so that it could be addressing a female deity and not just the male and very patriarchal deity we had grown up with. And I know you know what I'm talking about because you've been through this, right?
Right.
This
Right.
journey. And so that was very exciting. And in 99, I went to Israel. I had decided to go forward with a doctoral program. And I went to the Rockefeller Archaeological Library in the Old City, and based on the work of Bernadette Bruton, Women Leaders in the Ancient Synagogue, where she had implied uh, and just I think stopped short of saying directly that this woman was or wasn't a priestess, but the symbols led me to a former archaeological site outside of Haifa, and that was the symbol of well, I have here a five-armed candelabra, but everybody knows what a candelabra looks like
Right.
by whatever name and by however many arms it has. But of course, in Judaism, it's usually 7 arms and then 8 for Hanukkah, and then called a Hanukkah. But however they are, and I find them beautiful. I have to grab mine. I'm just going to do
Sure.
that.
Sure.
Now, this is one I would have never considered as a candelabra, legitimate, so to speak, because it has 5 arms.
Okay.
If I do like that, you can see.
Yeah. Yeah.
But but it's still, anytime I see this shape, it is very much a tree of life. And some scholars have written about that, and that's what Bruton wrote about, and that symbol, the tree, represents the goddess Asherah, who we definitely
Yes.
worshiped, prayed to, went on the hills to pray to where there were altars. And that's known. And it's known that Huldah, for example, the prophetess, would pray and have people following her, to be in prayer up on the hills and the high places. And
Right.
so there's a passage, more than one, in Kings, where it talks about the king taking over what had been tradition for about, I believe, 40 years. There had been little shrines to Asherah in the temples. I mean,
Right.
in the synagogues. and he wanted them just taken out and destroyed.
Right.
And so
I
that I
did
was,
a I did an episode in the first season about Shekinah and the Asherah, and
hmm,
it was three things: the Shekinah, Asherah, and I can't remember what the third thing was. But I did do an episode about that in the first season, so I know exactly
what
what
I'm
you're
talking
talking
about.
about, and the
Yeah. Oh,
destruction of the Asherah trees and the shrines and all of
that's
that. So
beautiful. Beautiful.
yeah,
So she was worshipped. We think that's a sign of how she was worshipped, but also there were poles, as you know,
yes,
and these little shrines. It seems the word batim is used, and nobody seems to really know what it is, but it might have been like a little woven house or shrine, as
mhm,
some exists in some Asian traditions. But that was in the synagogues. All of that got thrown out. Uh, because of I think it was King Josiah, his orders, and all of them not only were taken out of the synagogues, but ground up into dust. So it was so vitriolic, the fear and hatred of
right,
that deity and that way of connecting with the divine, because it didn't include the divine masculine, patriarchal one God. I mean, it was a female God, but
right,
for these people, it meant that you were straying, right? It was idolatry to them because you weren't just being totally monogamous. I want to
right,
say
right,
the word would be monotheistic, but in this case,
right,
kind of right the same thing. So, and also, I mean, such vitriol that it wasn't just about removing the image or placeholder from the synagogue space
right.
and grinding it up, but in some cases, grinding it up into dust and taking that dust and throwing it over graves, over cemeteries. You have to really hate or fear something, right?
Yeah,
To do that. Not to just say, let's move it out of here. We don't want to look at it. We don't want anybody worshiping it, but to
right,
destroy it to that degree and then do it the disrespect of strewing, the remnants over graves. Anyway, so we knew that there had to be such a role. We were doing it in modern times. We didn't have language for it, and Kohenet became then a word that we used. I had a strong hit already that yes, this had to be the case. And when I was at that
right,
archaeological library, I was with my cousin who was in her 80s, and we spoke with the librarian who brought out three volumes this thick reporting on this dig from Bet She'arim, where there are and were sarcophagi, and these are burial caves, basically. And one of them, she had pointed out, had the symbol of the tree. And I think it looked more like this than a seven arm. I think it was about five arm. Just a drawing on there. But to me, and not just to me, that could have indicated goddess worship, even as she was buried in a very or he was buried in a very traditional manner.
right, right.
So I got very excited. I saw in this one volume, as I was reading, that it said the word Kohenet equals sign priestess. And I got an intuitive hit as I've never had before. And I didn't know how to make it out. I didn't know how to describe it. It felt like a bolt of lightning ran through my body. And yeah, I didn't have language for that, even that
Right,
experience.
right,
It was enough that it got my attention and really guided much of my work from then on. So that's the last 24 years. I printed out that page, and I mean, I took a copy home and it hung next to my computer as I did my doctoral research and for years after, because it was, to me, confirmation that yes, you didn't
right,
just have to be, as it is written, you didn't just have to be the wife or daughter of a priest to claim the role of priestess. That it could have been somebody outside, a
right,
woman, right, who grew up and was called to it, or to whom people came because they trusted either her shamanic or her healing or prophetic other abilities,
right,
or they maybe came to her to make an amulet and things like that. By the way,
right.
that yeah, I'm sure you know this. There's a very good series, a couple of series now, I think, by Maggie Anton, Anton, Rashi's Daughters and the Enchantress and other things where she's really done her research, to say the least, and she describes in detail what went into being. It's earlier was called an N priestess, a Nadi two, somebody who for whatever reason, because she felt called or her family felt she was called to the role of a sacred, a holy woman, she'd be put in not a convent exactly, but in
Right, right,
a setting where she first of all vowed not to have children and not to have a partner, but to do, work of divinity, let's say.
right,
And that often included magic. And so one of the books she writes about how one of these women was making amulets, so to help a woman have an easy or safe pregnancy, or a range of things regarding health, uh,
right,
success in business, all the things that people still want amulets for, right?
right, right,
Whether it's a rabbit's foot or a mezuzah on the
right, right.
doorpost.
I mean,
Uh,
and that tradition is spread across so many cultures through so many time periods. You know what I mean? It's
mhm,
almost like the role of priestess is another divine feminine archetype that when we do this academic research, I mean, we see it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. You know what I mean? Like at some point, don't you just want to stand up and scream, like, how much more evidence do you need? How much more
absolutely.
evidence do you need? You know what I mean? I was talking to a friend the other day and I said, it's almost as if I'm waiting for, the like, how we know that the Christian church suppressed things like the Gnostic Gospels and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene.
Right.
Like, what are the odds that wouldn't it be logical to assume that there's some sort of document about goddess worship that has been suppressed, just like a whole bunch of other things were suppressed by the church? I mean, that makes sense to me.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? That somewhere there's some evidence of, you know what I mean? What else
It's
has been left out of the New
sure.
Testament? You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
I,
Yeah,
I
it would
mean,
be
and
lovely.
anybody, it's alarming to me how few people know
Yeah.
just how much the goddess is talked about in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
I mean,
She's
there are
not
a lot of
easily, yeah.
references. And if you go online and look, like there's whole lists of all the passages that talk about uh,
The
goddess as
Queen,
the
Queen of
mother.
Heaven or Queen of Heaven, Jeremiah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. It would be wonderful to find, some written documents, and slowly we are discovering things, but it's very slowly things like the cuneiform tablets that showed us in Hedwana, and the liturgy that was found in the
Right.
prayers and poems to the goddess Inanna. We do have
Well,
that.
and it feels like the pushback has always been like what happened with the, Venus of Willendorf and discoverers like that. They've always said, the because that theory was disproven, right? Because now they know it's not that all of these figurines were of goddesses, but they were fascinated with women
Hmm.
because women could give birth.
Right.
And, in pre prehistoric like caveman times, right? They hadn't made the connection between intercourse and pregnancy. So they thought that giving birth was just, like a supernatural
Right.
event,
Power. Right.
right? So
It
they
is.
were obsessed with and
Yeah.
enamored by, women's ability to give birth.
Right.
So, like, I can see that, right? Okay, maybe the Venus of Willendorf wasn't about a goddess, it was just about pregnant women, right? And the miracle of that.
But there are
Because
also, of course, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, because, in our time, it's like the spiritual is here and we are here. But then there wasn't really any separation. Like in their worldview, the spiritual and the earthly realm were like this, not like this. Does that
Hmm.
make sense?
Hmm. I think, there are certainly references like if when we stopped giving homage basically to the Queen of Heaven, we didn't have enough food to eat and so on.
Right,
But there's no mention of Shekhinah, for example, in the Torah, in the first five books of Moses,
right, right,
Uh, I mean, the five books. And so, yeah, so a lot of it came later in the Talmud. I mean, that's filled, and the Zohar, the mystical aspect of
right,
Judaism, filled with references to
right.
Shekhinah.
But we also have all this history before Christianity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and when you talk about the Kohenet, I think about the oracles, right? Because that's in ancient history, right?
Definitely.
I mean, if you look at the most famous example, right, the Oracle at Delphi,
Right.
um, Dr. Carla Ionescu, who's been on the show a bunch and we've become good friends, she was telling me that with the Oracle at Delphi, the history of the oracles themselves, who were always girls, right?
Mhm.
They used to be um, like noble women and educated women, and that's why the oracle's prophecies were usually very wordy and poetic
Mm.
and educated. But then as time went on, they became less so because the life expectancy of the oracle was very short. And
Mhm.
now they think that because there were um, fault lines and noxious gas in the earth where the Oracle of Delphi was, that's what caused seizures or hallucinations, or, you know what I mean? I'm not sure that I buy that. I mean,
Right,
yes, that's a
right.
very
Well,
convenient
people are
scientific
always looking for
explanation.
scientific explanations for
Um,
miracles. Yeah.
and that's why their life expectancy was so short. But
Right. Yeah.
um, so they started picking like peasant women instead
Mm.
of
Mm.
educated noble women.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know where I was going with that, but what made me think, when you were talking about the Kohenet, what made me think of the oracles is that Carla explained to me that when these oracles were chosen, they gave up everything
Yeah.
to go serve as the oracle.
Yeah.
If they were married and had children, they left their husband and
Hmm.
their children
Yeah.
to go serve this sacred
Function. Yeah.
function.
Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
And I believe, and I think other people believe, that they were speaking to the goddess, right? Because it wasn't always Apollo's gig,
Right.
right? The
Right.
oracle had a history before Apollo,
Yeah.
before the Greeks and Romans. The
Sure.
structure was there prior to the Greco-Roman period.
Definitely. Well, somebody
So
like Huldah again in the Bible is a prophetess, and that's an oracle, isn't it? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
yeah. So anyway, so yeah, I'm also thinking I want to come back to it later, but to talk about the incantation bowls that surfaced around the 6th century in
okay,
common era, because um, again, these same groups of women that we're talking about who could have all been encompassed in a priestess function. It depends who was describing the person. It could be a witch, it could be a magician, it could be priestess, it could be a sacred woman, holy woman.
right,
Um, uh, yeah, and sometimes even a lay woman or man were inscribing these incantation bowls
right,
for blessing, or I think also sometimes for curses. So
right,
anyway, so around 2000, I hosted a summer solstice big festival, and finally decided to come out in public and name myself Kohenet. And that was fraught with, all kinds of misgivings, because there was no way to be initiated as a Kohenet at that time. I had already been, and for some years after that, was in Yoruba, West African spiritual house.
mhm,
Uh, so that's also part of my training, let's say. But I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, just in terms of the naming, yeah. And so I was in a quandary. How do I name myself in the descriptions on the flyers? Something that simple.
right,
One spiritual teacher suggested feminist priestess, because I wasn't initiated in any particular tradition at that
right.
point. And so now I feel like I've had a series of several initiations,
And
formal and
it's
informal.
interesting that you say that, because, and I can't remember if we talked about this when we spoke on the phone or not, So it is only recently that I have come to embrace the term priestess as well, because I have not been did we talk about this?
A little bit, but say more.
Because I haven't been formally trained in a
Right.
particular tradition, because
Right.
now, um, very much thanks to the internet, there are dozens or
Right.
hundreds probably
Right.
traditions that you could be trained in. I mean, if you just go on the internet and do a Google search for priestess
Oh,
training,
sure. Sure.
you will be overloaded, right?
Yeah. Which has
But
its dangers. Yeah.
exactly. And we could talk about that a little bit too if you
Yeah.
want to, because I
Yeah.
realized why I'm frustrated with that. And I could
Sure.
just the other day I figured out how to like put words to that, like what really bugs me about that.
Okay.
Um, but then when I did my episode in this current season with Flora Ware, she really kind of changed my perspective about that, because I was always very skeptical of other people who called themselves priestess, because my response had always been, well, like what? You're a priestess of what? And what training did you have?
Right.
And what did you do to earn that title?
Right.
And Flora said to me, well, Kelly, at its basic roots, priestess just means someone who serves her community
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and acts as and walks the walk of the spiritual path that she
Yes.
claims to have.
Yeah.
Um, and she said, you believe in these practices of the ancient priestesses, and what they did was, they kept the torches and the flames lit in the temples,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and engaged people who needed help, and
Right. Right.
you know what I mean. She said, so as long as if you're doing that, then you are a priestess. So I've
Mm-hmm.
I've warmed up to that title, and now I will call myself that.
That's
And
great.
I am a priestess of the goddess because I serve her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't need to go through a formal training
Mm-hmm.
largely. And you know what? I would do that if that was something that I could afford, but I can't.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Which is in itself problematic, right?
yes.
Because I was thinking, yes, of course, a Kohenet who wasn't married or daughter of a priest could have apprenticed with somebody as a young
Yes.
woman, a young girl, and come into it that way. So I do want to come back to this. I'll just finish the piece. Yeah.
Okay.
So coming out, that was in 2000, and a friend of mine said, "Well, you can call yourself whatever you want," in a very dismissive way, which
Right.
I've never forgotten because so that means what? We only exist in certain roles if other people define us. I mean, there's a whole
Right.
conversation to be had around that, and there was no place that you would have gone or could have gone, except some in the West African tradition, yes, but that turned out not to be my path. Yes, I could have been privately initiated, just as some rabbis have been and still are, I think, privately ordained and
Right.
don't go to an institution. But Rabbi Jill
Well, I'm
Hammer,
also ordained because now you can do that online for $50. So,
exactly, exactly. There was a woman, Rabbi Jill Hammer, who was on some of the same listservs I was on, who started
mhm.
asking, "Do any of you define yourselves as a priest or priestess?" And she started, I think, getting intrigued with this whole notion and exploring the idea. And about 7, 8 years later, she and who became her co-director, co-founder, Taya Sher, founded the Kohenet Priestess Training Institute. And so that was very exciting. Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb, poet Alicia Ostreicher, myself, and one or two other women were on the founding advisory board. And they have by now, ordained about 100 Kohanot. So that's very exciting. I think it's definitely developed more credibility for the role, more
Mhm.
recognition that there is such a thing. Perhaps, I hope, less people, being not only skeptical, but saying, oh, isn't that just kind of witchy? Or, just not
Right,
understanding
right.
And yeah, maybe there is, that piece of it. How do
Right,
we define which? Starhawk has often written and spoken about that, and
right,
she has come out for years very proudly, as yes, she's a witch, and she's an author, educator, activist,
right,
who is an environmentalist, who's very concerned with saving the planet, not having water privatized, fighting the WTO and doing, as you know, major
right, right,
actions. So anyway, I'll step back to say, yes, you're right. People for $50 can become a reverend, probably get ordained. I don't know about getting ordained as a priestess, but they can get that from some people who start a program, sometimes as little as 9 months, which I think is absurd. I
right,
think it has to be a longer training. And to me, the most important thing is that the leaders and the teachers be ethical.
right. I mean, like I did the, I filled out a form and spent $50 and got ordained,
As a minister, though, no? Or
but
as a minister?
yes.
Yeah.
Um, but I did it because I felt compelled to do it.
Uh-huh.
Like something told me to do that because it would be useful at some point in the future.
Well, it also allows you to marry people in certain states,
That's
right?
true.
Yeah.
Um, which,
It's why people often do that, I think.
I don't feel like I know anybody who needs that right now, but I might in the future.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It felt like something I would need, so
Hmm.
I did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I actually like read the workshops on the on the they have like, all these free online training things. And I actually like watched those and read the book, The Power Invested in Me, that came with your
Uh-huh.
certificate. And you know what I mean? Because
Yeah. Well, you take it seriously. Yeah.
yes,
It's
yes,
like with many other professions, you can get some of the accreditation and then hang a shingle, and you can have zero ethics or compassion or empathy.
right.
If you don't have,
And I found that to be true in other things that I mean, I have a few certifications myself, right? Like I'm a certified past life regressionist.
okay,
Um, but it's the same thing there, right? You could
mhm,
hang a shingle and
right,
charge people $450.
yeah,
You know what I mean? But I took it seriously. And when I did do it for money, I was ethical about it. I don't do that
right,
anymore. I mean,
right,
like I'll do it like if a friend asks me to do
yeah,
a, just like I know how to read tarot cards, like I'm not particularly good at it. I still have to look it up in the book, you
yeah,
know. But I will do that if somebody asks me
hmm,
as a friend, just do a favor for a friend. But I know people that make a lot of money doing that. And
no,
the people that I know that do those things for a living struggle with that because it's a question of ethics for them.
yeah,
Because on the one hand, they don't want to take advantage of people. But
right,
on the other hand, it is what they're doing for a living, you know?
yeah,
I mean, in some witchcraft traditions, they don't do it from like it's against their ethical
right.
whatever to do it for
To
money.
teach it for money, right?
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
But yeah, I think having a moral compass that is alive and well and active, having compassion, having empathy, I think are to me basic qualities for being any kind of doing any kind of spiritual leadership. And as we know,
Right.
we
And
often don't find it. Yeah.
I often find myself now saying, I'll say to my wife, well, I am a priestess. I should probably act like it. In a particular situation where I'm either catty or
Right. Right.
gossiping or
Uh-huh.
whatever.
Catch yourself. Yeah.
Right. Because part of my spiritual path has always been, of course, to
Mhm.
try to be a better person. I think that's part of anybody's spiritual path if they're on one, right?
Right.
There's
Right.
always room for improvement. I mean, yes, we're
Mhm.
human and we have to give ourselves a break, but
To strive to be better. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
That's important. I just realized there's one piece I left out of this story about the reading
Sure.
the Kohenet equals priestess in Israel. So when I saw that in Jerusalem and got so excited, and I pointed it out, and both my 82 or something year old cousin and the librarian uh, immediately said, "Oh no." The minute I said, "Oh, but this shows this women could have been priestess even if they weren't married to a priest." Oh no. There was just a complete non-recognition of the possibility because these were women, older women who hadn't been raised with that possibility,
Right.
you know. So to even imagine. So I'm grateful to, having been born in a time and finding my way, to spiritual programs and people
Right.
that
Right.
opened those eyes, let's say, or those possibilities
Right. Right.
for a different way of being, a non-patriarchal, particularly way of being. Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
Oop,
just slipped
sorry.
away.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I
There
was
you
over
are.
here twirling a wire and it somehow
Uh,
turned my camera
uh,
off.
yeah, it did it again. You disappeared. Okay. Ah, okay.
I'm going to stop doing that. Sorry.
That's
Just
okay.
fidgeting.
That's okay.
Okay. You
Uh,
wanted to go back to the inscription bowls?
oh, yeah, I think actually I said what I wanted to say, just that these women and men would inscribe them in circular fashion in these small bowls, which you can see at certain museums.
I was going
And
to say, I think I've seen photos of
yeah,
them.
they're at the Semitic Museum, part of Harvard Divinity School, and also in Philadelphia, University of Penn Museum. Um, one part of it. Anyway, they have always struck me, and I'm sure somewhere in my head, that even though I haven't found evidence yet, it feels to me like they would have existed before just 600, the year 600, but
Right.
or around that time. They're like 4 or 5 to 700, like something like that. But people would be asked to write them so that if you, for example, moved into a new house, uh, they would bring a bowl to keep away Lilith. That's how I got to it because of my work on Lilith, or
Right.
other demons. Keep those away from our household or from so and so. And this is also very odd to me, you would often bury it in the dirt at the doorway. I don't know why you wouldn't just keep it outside, but I guess it
Well,
was,
that's a really old witchcraft practice to bury things.
yeah, yeah. But
I
at the
say that
doorway,
I
yeah.
say that because I've got been down the witchcraft road. It's one of the many roads I've taken to get to where I am.
Hmm.
And actually, we have something buried right outside our front door.
Uh-huh.
So,
Interesting, interesting.
yeah.
And there are also stories that sometimes the bowls would be, I don't really have a way to show this, but I'll try. One on top of the other
Okay.
to trap the demon if there was a demon who was about to haunt your house. Uh,
Yeah. And
or,
ours isn't really so much about demon as it is
yeah,
about negative energy.
uh-huh. Which is, for some people, I mean, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, that might have been how
That
they
was a demon.
defined it
Right.
also. Yeah.
Right. Right.
And, back then also there were beneficial demons. So you could ask one of those to help you with the bad ones,
Right.
which is interesting.
It's funny because whenever somebody comes to our house for the first time, one of the first things they say is, the energy in your house is really good. It's so relaxing here.
Nice, nice. Yeah. Well, I think that probably has to do with the people as well as any objects in
That's
the
true.
house.
We do a lot to maintain a calm atmosphere in our house. Like
Nice,
my wife and I have both worked really hard to have relatively drama-free lives.
nice.
So it
Important.
usually doesn't walk through our door either.
Right, right, exactly.
If it does, it doesn't stay long.
Right. And I
I
think
mean,
for me, that's one of the gifts of aging is that, yeah, I won't have people in my orbit who carry that
right,
kind of
right.
energy, where
I
I'm
mean,
sure.
I try and be of service to a lot of people,
Yeah,
so it
yeah.
is in my orbit, but usually
Mhm.
not in my house.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm talking about like friendships or people, yeah,
Right, right.
who I choose to spend time with. And of course, all of that changed, or I think we reevaluated a lot of it during COVID.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Really learned what your priorities were and
Right,
who you wanted to have time with and yeah,
right, right.
share space with. But
So, do you want to talk about the problematic nature of spirituality for sale?
sure. Um, I'll just say one thing and then I'd love to hear what you have to say on it.
Okay.
And that is, well, it comes back to what we were really already talking about, and I wrote about in Lilith's Fire, which was my thesis turned into a book in 2000.
Oh,
And
okay. I didn't realize that it was your
no, it's just
thesis.
a small piece, but I do a caution against uh, just blindly trusting your spiritual leaders, but
Right,
questioning their authority and making sure before you commit to a tradition or a priest or a rabbi or any particular leader, who they are as people and how they
right.
behave. Yeah, and what they embody.
Well,
Um,
and I like to know about the tradition too. Like, how long has that
sure.
tradition been around?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You know, did it
Hmm.
start with Aleister Crowley or did it start with,
Right.
Joe Blow from in Sacramento in
Mm-hmm.
1997? I mean,
Yeah, 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 yeah. And so, yeah, spirituality for sale. Say something more.
well, I mean, which has left a really bad taste in my mouth because it's just one of those things that I think this happened in other spiritual traditions, but I saw it happen there the most that, it became an aesthetic, and having it be such an online culture didn't help,
Hmm.
and during the pandemic, I saw it just kind of explode, right? Like all of a sudden, like witchcraft was in,
Hmm.
right? And everybody wanted to be in on that. And
Right.
then the market was saturated with it, right? I mean, you couldn't go online without an advertisement for candles or incense
Really? I'm not aware. Interesting.
or statues or goddess statues, and you know what I mean. And I understand how AI works too, right? Like a lot of that is targeted advertising to me, right?
Right, right.
But and then people start coming up with these made up traditions and teaching you how to be a witch in a particular
Uh,
tradition,
uh,
and a lot of misinformation out there.
yeah.
And in my experience in witchcraft, which I had a lot of at the time, because I mean, I tried to be Wiccan in the early 2000s. That was I tried to be a lot of things before I landed where I am now.
Yeah.
And that's fine, right? Like they've all been one step closer to the
Sure.
goddess.
Sure.
Um, Mostly I was just out there trying to be a polytheist for a
Hmm.
lot of years before I landed where I am now, which is essentially a monotheist.
Yeah.
Um, and now I see the same thing happening with it bothers me that I see feminism, right? Like almost militant feminism, which I understand we are at a place where that is necessary,
Hmm.
right? That sometimes aggressiveness, assertiveness needs to become aggressiveness. And
Hmm.
from the Me Too movement on, we have needed to be aggressive.
Hmm.
I get that. I am a champion for women. I love women. I mean, like, I deeply love women, all
Yeah.
women.
Yeah.
And I don't just mean that as a lesbian or as a
Right,
sexual
right.
thing.
Got
Like,
it.
I really, truly love women,
Hmm.
and they should be angry. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So I am all for getting out from under you know, the boot that has been on their neck for
Hmm.
hundreds of years.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't like the trend that I see, which is organizations geared towards that wrapping themselves up in the package of goddess spirituality.
Hmm.
That's a trend that I see.
Hmm.
Do you see that?
Hmm. I don't know that I do. But I think
Well,
certainly I've seen what you're talking about in terms of a lot of people who I've never heard of offering priestess programs, initiations or certificates without having much training themselves or
yeah,
the longevity that you're talking about that
right,
is necessary because you need the experience and you
right.
need proven
Well, and
yourself.
I think part of the problem is our language is so limited, and language often gets co-opted, right? Um, so I think the word itself, goddess, has been tossed about very casually
Oh,
when
yeah. Yeah,
it shouldn't
absolutely.
be.
Yeah.
So that's what I see a lot in the feminist movement, that goddess gets used as, well, she's a goddess. Well, no, she's really not. She's just a celebrity, or
Yeah, right,
you
right.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
Also,
or in a feminist context, like, or in a health centric yoga based idea,
right, right.
find
Yeah,
your inner goddess, like.
right, right, right. No, that's
And
getting
I
very
I
common.
I
Yeah,
get that expression, find your inner goddess. Like, I understand what they're saying, but I
right.
really wish they would say something different.
Yeah,
You know what
because
I
it
mean?
seems to as a diminutive almost at times, or
Yes.
right, or to be devaluing what we mean by if we're talking
Yes.
about the creator. And yes, we
Yes.
have our inner goddess and our inner sacred feminine, I think is what I would be more prone to say. But I
Yes.
also want to say one other thing that I meant to tell you, which is that maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago, I moved up to in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay Area. I moved further north than I'd been living and wanted to explore one of the bookstores that I'd seen that I liked
Hmm.
and went there once to look for something just to see their women's spirituality section. Well, not only wasn't there really one, but what few books they had that they considered in that field was in the witchcraft section.
Hmm.
So, in terms of misdefinitions or misunderstandings of a field, this is a whole, scholarly discipline. It's not
Right.
just
Right.
somebody's, little idea of what to call a topic, so there's always that
Right.
educating that we need to do, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I plan to have a couple episodes next season about how to bridge the gap between people who are scholars and academics that also lead a fairly rich spiritual life,
Hmm.
like yourself, like Monette, like
Hmm.
uh like Carla,
Hmm.
and talk about how we bridge the gap between you guys and kind of the average spiritual seeker whose only research tool is Google,
Mm.
when journal
Yeah.
articles are often behind paywalls and
Right, right.
only available to academics, and you know
Or
what I
they
mean?
don't know who to read. I mean, if they don't get to the right
Right.
website or
Because
person
there's
to
so much misinformation out there,
well,
you
how would you
know.
sort it out if we landed from Mars today or Venus, you know,
Right?
and
Exactly.
looked
So,
online for a source on an expert in, these subjects, you yeah,
right.
exactly.
And especially when this language has become so muddied, I think
Yeah,
it's hard to, yeah, it's really
yeah.
hard to find out what the truth is. I mean, people
Mhm.
like me and you we can try and educate people all we want, but how many people can we really talk to? You know what I
Okay.
mean?
So we need,
Like my friends are tired of hearing about it. They're as educated about this stuff as they're gonna be. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And I
but you're
can't.
doing this wonderful podcast, so you're also reaching a lot of people that way.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's true.
yeah.
And I start my priestess at the altar next month on Mother's Day. So
Mm.
hopefully that'll reach a few more people. Although I think the people that will listen to that are people that already think the way I do. So
Mhm. And how is that going to go? I love the name.
So, Priestess at the Altar is a Sunday morning message to hopefully inspire people throughout their week.
Hmm.
And I did it because about a couple months ago, there are actually things I miss about being raised in a Catholic home.
Mhm.
My parents weren't strict Catholics, but the thing that I liked about growing up in a Catholic home is I very much liked the pageantry of the Sunday Mass.
Mhm.
And what I miss is the Sunday sermon. Like, there was a Sunday a couple months ago where I had these very nostalgic memories of going to church with my parents on Sunday and
Yeah.
being preached to,
Right.
right, about things like compassion and love
Mhm.
and community. I don't know. We went to kind of a liberal Catholic church, I guess, because that's what I remember. And I
Yeah.
remember being moved and
Mhm.
inspired.
That's
And as I explained in my little trailer that I put up about it, when I feel a longing for something, that usually means one of two things. Either one, I don't really need that thing, and the goddess is just tapping me on the shoulder, going, yeah, that thing you think you need, you don't need that. Or it's a need in my community
right.
that needs to be filled,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I should try and fill that need.
Mhm.
So that's what Priestess at the Altar Sunday morning message
Oh,
sets
wonderful.
out to do. So we'll see how it goes. It
Yeah.
premieres on Mother's Day, which I thought was appropriate.
What time?
10 a.m. Central. So that's 8
8 a.m.
a.m. Pacific.
Okay. So I may have to watch it on YouTube. Are you going to have it on YouTube? I mean, recordings on
Mhm,
YouTube?
mhm.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely.
Only on YouTube. And I'm going to do them as live premieres,
Mm-hmm.
which means that obviously it's not live, it's recorded, but I watch it at the same time the people are watching it. If you tune in at 10 a.m. Central,
Huh?
and then there's a live
Oh,
chat feed
no.
at the same
Very
time
nice.
so
That's
that I
excellent.
can interact with people. We'll
That's
see.
excellent. Yeah. Yeah. It's wonderful you had that influence of being inspired in a tradition which also is very ritual heavy, which is one thing I really like about Catholicism. I grew up in Reform Judaism,
Yeah,
where we didn't, I mean, we have our holidays for sure, but not the level of ritual
yeah.
we also
Yeah,
have
I
in
mean
Orthodox.
that, with the candles and the incense and the
Right.
singing and
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I liked that. I did like that.
Oh, yeah. It's how you move people, I think.
Right.
All the
But there
symbols.
were but there were a lot of things also being raised because my parents weren't strict Catholics. I mean, it's not like my father was reading scripture at home
Right.
every night at dinner or anything like that. I mean, we went to church every Sunday, but
Mhm.
that's just what we did. We went to church every Sunday. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Um, I think it was probably more to keep up appearances with our little small town community than anything else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, but even though they weren't strict, I still got that kind of insidious programming because I went to
Right.
catechism and
Oh, yeah.
I had to, work really hard in my adult life to overcome some of those things. The
Sure.
hardest of which was believing in a system of punishment and reward.
Yeah.
That took a lot of work to overcome that.
I'm
And
sure.
I no longer believe that, but that
Well,
was
look
really
at
hard to
how
get
many
over.
people in both Judaism and Christianity carry guilt through much of their lives because of the religious teachings of their youth.
Right. I used to say Catholicism is the only religion in the world that will make you feel guilty about not feeling guilty.
Well said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I no longer believe that. I don't believe that the goddess works that way. I don't think that she judges us. I don't think that we need to ask for forgiveness for anything because she's never judged us in the first place. I believe something else that Flora Ware said in a workshop of hers that I went to. She said there's nothing that we have to do to get the goddess to love us, and there's nothing that we can do to make her not love us. So
Mhm. Unconditional love. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Very, very different than one that is predicated on your behavior, your good behavior, your
yes,
obedience.
yes. I
Right.
mean, I do talk about obedience, but I say that in the context of I'm obedient to spiritual principles,
Mhm.
but I'm obedient to my spiritual principles.
Right.
But my spiritual principles are gifts of the goddess, right? They're
Mhm.
gifts of her grace.
Mhm.
It's interesting because I talk about the goddess in very kind of traditional Christian terms, which I think I might get pushback from. But the way I look at it is I'm taking traditional scripture like stuff and kind of turning it on its head and I'm rewriting the story.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it.
Yeah.
I'm not just
Yeah.
recreating the same old thing with
Right.
monotheism and
Oh, and I love that as a practice. I used to teach women's sacred text class, and one of the things we did was take a passage. The first time I taught it, I asked people to work with Genesis, and some people really hated that idea, but I think it was still a good exercise for them. But to take a piece you were raised with and didn't necessarily agree with or have outgrown, and to write it and make it your own. And that was a really powerful doing, and that reinterpretation of a specific text, biblical text, is called midrash in the Jewish tradition. So I would often add that piece. Um,
oh cool.
yeah.
So I recorded an episode with Rona Dietrich, who is her next book comes out in October, so she'll actually be the season finale for season 3.
Uh,
And her new book that's coming out is about rewriting Eve
mm,
and rewriting Eve's story and telling that story from Eve's perspective. She actually did a TED talk about it. I will send you the link
oh,
because it was
thanks.
very good. And that
Thanks.
she's all about that, telling a new story.
Also, Patricia Lynn Riley, who Monet work
Yes,
again,
yes,
she just, they put out a book on Eve as well, Woman
yeah,
Spirit
yeah.
Reclamation. Yeah,
So I think we're all telling a new story
I hope so. We need it.
or revising an old story, which I think is what you are doing.
Mm, both. I think both. I mean, writing new ones, um, in the sense of, for example, I've started something that I thought might be the next book, but I don't think it will. But it's Lilith Dialogues. And so actually having conversations with this goddess turned demon, if you followed, how she's portrayed in literature and mythology. Yeah. And
See,
so,
I don't think that. I don't think that's true. I don't think Lilith is a demon.
right, right. Well, a lot of people don't. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that's interesting. I look forward to seeing what you do with that.
Yeah.
So, like conversations with God, but with Lilith.
With her. Yeah. Because my other book, as I think you know, is Talking to Goddess, and those are short conversations with or prayers to God from women in 25 different traditions. So
Right, right.
I love that, and yeah, I invite you, if you well, you're going to mostly do sermons, it sounds like, but if you want to bring any of those bits of prayer and blessing and meditation into your
Yes, I think
program.
because each one I do take from
uh,
something in the library that I showed you before we
yes,
started.
yes,
Some are from daily meditation books that I have, some are just from stories I've heard,
yeah,
some are from Native American traditions, some are from just
yeah,
books that have really cool stories in them. So yeah, I mean I take the message from all kinds of different
yeah,
sources. So
yeah, sure, yeah,
yeah, I will have to pick up a copy of that.
that's great, yeah. Charlie Toledo who's Towa Native American elder. She has a lovely
I was
meditation
gonna
in there.
say that name sounds very familiar.
And of course, Max Dashu, and she's got a longer meditation in there. And Louisa Tish has a short prayer. And yeah, there are a
I
lot of
have a
people.
Native American book called Every Day is a Good Day.
Huh,
I think that's what it's called. Every Day is a Good Day.
huh.
And it's
We'd love
all
to. Yeah.
reflections from Native American women.
Oh, nice. There's also a beautiful piece in there from Judy Grahn called "May We Embrace" that I think you would like. Yeah, it's
Okay.
at the beginning.
You
Yeah.
know, my to read list has outgrown this.
Yes,
It is longer than this lifetime will allow.
I
So,
know. I know the feeling.
but
Yeah.
you know, I'll be back. I know that. So
You can
just keep
finish
it somewhere.
it. Yeah.
Maybe I'll give it to you. So when I see you in the next life, I'll be like, you have those books I left with
Have you
you?
read this yet? We could exchange lists, that's for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been great. I really have enjoyed talking with you and
Well,
um
before you go,
yeah.
so I asked all the guests the same three questions at the end of the show.
Okay.
So the first question is, tell me something about yourself that people who know you would be surprised to learn.
That I just came out of a silent retreat.
Oh,
That's
you are a little chatty.
well, yeah, that's probably who you want for your podcast. But yeah,
That's true.
3 day silent retreat, and actually did it with relative ease. So it was harder. The part about being away from electronics was harder than not talking. So that was
I
interesting.
bet.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, no, it was very deep and powerful. Yeah.
Was it the first time you'd ever done that?
I had been on one other, but it was much shorter, and it was years ago, and it was a Sufi retreat where I had also presented on Lilith, and then stayed for another. That was half a day, and stayed for another full day, I think. And the meals were silent, but I don't think all of it was in this way. So
Right.
yeah, this was deeper.
Okay. I thought about doing that myself. I think I could do it.
Hmm.
I think I would have the same trouble. It would be
Yeah,
harder for me to stay away from the electronics than it would
yeah,
to keep my
yeah.
mouth shut. Okay. So the second question is, what is your current favorite TV series or movie?
Oh dear. Many, many. Um, but the extraordinary attorney Wu, I think, which was a so far, well, not limited, but a series, one season, and I'm hoping they'll have another one
Okay.
about an autistic attorney who was very high functioning and played by a wonderful actress. It's a Korean series, and I grew so used to hearing the Korean that I was wanting to hear more of it after the season ended.
Okay. Okay.
And now, of course, there are a lot of shows to choose from. So, yeah,
Right. Right.
some of
Okay.
the Netflix specials, yeah, have gotten me
Okay.
hooked.
And your final question is, if your life were a movie,
Mhm.
what would be the theme song on the soundtrack?
Oh boy. Don't rain on my parade.
Okay. That's a really good answer. That's a really good answer.
I mean, there are wonderful chants that I now sing and love, but we've been sort of
No,
talking
that's
about a range
fabulous.
of my lifetime, and you said, yeah, something
So
larger
I
than
will add, so I have a public playlist on Spotify with everybody's answer to this question.
Barbara Streisand's version. Yeah,
Barbara Streisand. Okay, good.
definitely,
You're
definitely
specific.
that.
I like that. And that's a fabulous version.
What an idea! That's a great idea to have a playlist. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. And there's only been one time that I had the same answer as somebody else.
Really,
And I have to tell you, it is a very eclectic mix.
I bet. I can't wait to hear it. When will I see it, or is it already?
Um, I have I put it up on Instagram.
Uh-huh.
If you go to, you know how you can pin posts to the top of Instagram?
Yes.
It's one of my pin
I
posts
think
at the
I do it
top.
more on Facebook, but I think I know how to do it on Instagram. Okay, I'll go
It's
check
one
it
of my
out.
pin posts, and there's a link in there.
That's a great idea. Oh, I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that, yeah, there's a link to the
I should
playlist.
probably create one for Lilith Institute. I have a good bibliography on the website, by the way. So if
Okay,
people
good,
want
great,
to reference
great.
that, yeah. And I think you encouraged me to also let people know my contact info.
Yes.
So just they can,
And all of that will be in the show notes.
okay.
when I post the episode on YouTube and on iTunes and Spotify and
Enough.
wherever else
Okay.
people listen to their
Oh,
podcasts.
wonderful. Yeah, it's just basically info@lilithinstitute.com, and I have a
Okay.
website and also an app by that name. So
Okay.
great.
Well, D'vorah, it's been great having you on the show. I'm sure
Thank
that
you.
I will see you again
I hope so. It's been
on the
wonderful.
show or somewhere else, right? You never know when you're going to run into people,
That's true. That's true. I'm
right?
so glad you've created this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Sure.
you so much.
Happy
I
to do
love the people that I meet on this show. And it's still, it doesn't get old. You know what
it.
I mean?
I
Every
bet.
time I reach out to somebody and I'm like, hi, I'm a complete stranger. And I
Right.
have this podcast where I just kind of gush about the goddess and you
Yeah,
want to come on the show? And people are like, yeah,
I know. Well, it's wonderful because you're also that combination that you're interested in of the scholarly and the spiritual. I
yes,
appreciate that as well.
yes. Because I kind of sit at the point between those
Juncture.
worlds,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
I was an academic,
Yeah.
right? When I was in graduate school, I was an academic. And
Right.
then I kind of sort of worked in the academic field after that for a while. Not really, though. I was on the other side. I was on the vendor side after that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but now I'm not, and now I'm doing this. So
Wonderful. May it continue.
here's hoping. Here's hoping.
Yeah.
Well, until then,
Till
D'vorah,
then,
I wish you the peace and the love of the goddess. Thanks again for coming on the show.
thank you, Kelly. Many blessings.
Thanks for watching The Girlfriend God on YouTube. If you enjoy this podcast, the best way you can support it is to like it, follow it, leave comments on the page, rate it, review it, share it with your friends. But most of all, subscribe to this channel. And if you want more of The Girlfriend God, you can find The Girlfriend God on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Thanks again for watching.